Champions. I'm Amy Morgan, the feature writer for the Marriage Initiative, and I am delighted to introduce Jeremy and Susanne Stalnecker to you today. They work with Mighty Oaks Foundation to help veterans, service members, and first responders heal their hearts and their marriages. Jeremy co-founded Mighty Oaks with Chad Robichaux in 2012 out of their desire to help America's military warriors and their families suffering from the unseen wounds of combat. Jeremy also served as a Marine Corps infantry officer and as a senior pastor. A military wife herself, Susanne is the Foundation's Director of Women's Programs. She published Shield of Faith, 365 Daily Devotions for Military Families in 2022. Jeremy and Susanne, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting us. I knew the word was there. Thank you for inviting us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, we are just grateful for the work you do. Could you describe some of the challenges that our veterans and our service members face?
Sure. Go ahead.
I mean, I can speak from the women's side and just kind of how we, a lot of the struggles that I would say families and marriages probably face during times of service or even deployments and things like that. I think communication is a really big struggle. I would say communication and connection probably are the two, because then when you come back together after a long period of time apart, those can be the two things that can be really difficult to find, again, a rhythm in communicating and also connecting with one another, and just kind of seeing each other in that way again when you're home together versus apart. So I would say the two probably biggest struggles that I've seen is communication and connection.
Yeah. And I think go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you, like, even just overall, like, I know you Mighty Oaks originally started with the combat veteran, and originally was just male only, and then extended to the spouses. So back us up a little, kind of give us kind of the overall big picture, and then we're going to hone in on how you all really serve the men and the women, and then the marriages. But give us a big picture, because our marriage champions may not have heard of you before.
Yeah. So, the Mighty Oaks Foundation, we work with veterans, active duty service members, first responders, and then spouses. And, obviously, as we're helping the service member or the first responder, we need to help the spouse as well. And we do that a number of ways, but our core program is what we call the Legacy Program. Yeah. We have 5 different locations across the country, and we have a separate women's program and men's program. We'll bring either men or women to one of those 5 locations. We spend 5 days with them and talk about trauma, talk about brokenness, talk about hurt, all of those issues that they're grappling with. And then as quickly as we can, we move beyond that and start talking about how to understand how we were created by God and the purpose and the design that comes with that creation, and really getting a hold of the truth that once we align our lives to the lives God created us to live, the traumas, the hurt, the brokenness of the past, although it's still there, it no longer needs to define us or chain us to the past, which is where a lot of people are. And so, again, there's a lot more to that, but we approach this from a peer-to-peer standpoint or perspective, which is very helpful as we even talk about marriage and some of these other issues. Every person who leads a class and every person who's teaching and having those conversations during those programs started off as a student. So they came because they needed help. And during the time that they were with us, we said, hey, they may be someone that we could bring along later on. And we spent about a year with them, helping to train them in really what we do and how we do it and all those things, so that when they stand in front of a class, it's not a top-down, clinical approach or even a pastor to a parishioner. It's very much, I know where you are because I've been there. We've struggled the same way. And I don't have it all figured out, but I'm moving forward and I want to take you with me. And so that's very, very powerful, as you can imagine. And then beyond that, we have an aftercare team that helps people after the session, after those 5 days, get plugged into specific types of counseling, maybe marriage counseling, maybe it's something else, substance abuse counseling or whatever, get them plugged into the type of counseling that they need. And so, we've been doing that for a long time. As you mentioned, Chad Robichaux and his family really started Mighty Oaks coming out of an experience with trauma and then finding their identity in Christ. And I met Chad and his family shortly after that. And we've been working on this since then. And since 2012, we've had about 7,000 folks come through the program.
Yeah.
And we've spoken to tens of thousands of more in conferences and other settings. So God has opened a lot of doors for us.
Oh, well, I love that. And I know when you had mentioned that for the people that come to the legacy programs, you know, there's a lot of, compartmentalizing, the emotions, the trauma from, the injury or the combat. Could you even just talk a little bit about what some of that does? I know you said that approximately 80% of combat veterans have dealt with a divorce.
Yeah, that's the statistic that we've been given. We're in a weird time right now as a country, but we came through basically 20 years of combat with Afghanistan and Iraq. And so you have combat veterans who are not home, as Susanne mentioned. There's really struggles with connection and communication. And what adds to that struggle is the fact that your service members are deployed. And, it's crazy, but it's not uncommon for men or women in the military over the 20 years of war that we had in Iraq and Afghanistan to be deployed 6, 7, 8 times. So you think about someone who not only are they dealing with the trauma of war, the things they've seen and experienced and all those things, but they're coming or going from home for years.
All the time.
This
Yeah.
isn't a one-time thing. This is, if they're on a 6-month deployment, and some deployments are much longer than 6 months, but if they're on a 6-month deployment, on the front end of that, before they deploy, they've got about 6 months of training to get ready for it. So they're away training. They're home on the weekends, but they're going in and out. Then they're gone for that deployment period. And then they come home and they're, readdressing the rest of their lives after that deployment. So there's this constant cycle. And for some, it's during an entire marriage, or it just puts so much stress on the relationship that the marriage doesn't last.
Yeah. Well, you guys kind of experienced your own cycle like that. Could you share your story of your, was it 6 years that you were in the Marine Corps? Or what's
8 years in the Marine Corps. I had 4 active duty years that included a tour to Iraq as a part of the initial push into Iraq in 2003. And, again, for me, that was, I say again, we've already talked, but maybe not everyone heard the other talk, right?
Right.
But for me, that was the fulfillment of a lifelong dream. That was something that I had always wanted to do. Susanne and I were married in college. And so, during that time, we had a lot going on, and I don't think ever really settled our roles as husband and wife in that relationship. And then I went into a training cycle immediately after college. And then I was an infantry officer, so I was constantly training, eventually deployed to Iraq. So we had been married for about 5 years, a little over 5 years, I guess. When I came home from Iraq and left the Marine Corps, I went to work at a church. But in that 5 years, at least half of that time, I was away, again, in that cycle of coming and going. And so it was after combat, after all of that for the first time, even though we'd been married for 5 years and been together longer than that, we had 2 small children at home. For the first time, we're really figuring out how to be married on a day-to-day, neither one of us is going anywhere, kind of basis. And so that was, a real challenge added to the other challenges of coming home from a combat experience.
Well, Susanna, I'd like to hear your take on that, about what that was like, because you're not a single parent, but you got to do single parent things for a while. And because I think this is the thing that you have found for the women, for the wives, that this is really, this is where you've really stepped up to support, because they have some common things that are really difficult. So let's hear about it in your context of what you experienced.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you say single parenting, because I think for a lot of women, it does end up being like that. And for us, maybe it was a relatively short period of time, but I feel like in the short time that we were married before Jeremy got out of the Marine Corps, we probably dealt with kind of everything that somebody would deal with during military service and being married to someone who's in the military. So we, aside from, I know Jeremy mentioned his combat deployment, which was a little bit of a longer deployment. He did another longer deployment as well, as part of the time that he was in, as well as short ones. So it would be like a month or a couple of weeks that he'd be gone, but he did one other longer deployment. And it was during that deployment that we had our son. So one of our boys was born while he was gone. And so that was, I mean, talk about being a single parent. You're like, I mean, we
Yeah.
had a toddler at the time and then had a newborn. And it was just, that is something that a lot of women deal with though, having a baby on your own and being faced with that was something that I was like, I would never want to do that. It was like early on in our marriage and I was meeting other military wives and they were telling, older military wives were telling me some of the things that they had been through. And that was one of the things that came up. And I'm like, I would never want to do that. Like who would want to have a child without their husband there? Well,
Right.
I ended up doing that. So, that's just one of the things. And so in the 5 years that we were married before Jeremy got out, there was a lot of things that we dealt with that just, built one upon the other. I felt very alone in all of it and very, like I'm doing my thing over here. He's doing his thing over here. And it was totally fine. I was totally fine with it. I was not harboring any bitterness or resentment or anything like that at that time. Basically, all the times that we were spending together were good times because he was either coming home from something or we were trying to figure out, if he was going to be gone. And so what are we going to do while he's gone and all of these things. And so it was always, it was not good when he left, but anytime that we were reunited or the times that we were together, we never really had to figure out how to have communication in any real kind of way or how to figure out how to be married or life, like in a normal kind of way or life kind of way. And so it was not until we had been married for 5 years until we were faced with that. And then it was not a good time either. It was not a good time for him because he was really struggling in a lot of ways. And so it wasn't like we were finally like, okay, finally things are settled down. He's not going to be leaving anymore. He has more of a settled kind of job. It wasn't like that. It was like when we were in the position of then now finally having to figure out how to do life together, how to figure out, things. He was not in a good place. And then I became like not in a good place.
Yeah.
So, and I feel like a lot of, couples kind of end up there because you live this very intense period of time. And this is kind of what we're dealing with right now in regards to what Jeremy was talking about with Mighty Oaks is that we've gone through this period of time where it's this very intense cycle of deployments and being gone and all that. And now on the other side of that, now how are we supposed to do life in a normal kind of way? And so that's kind of what we dealt with kind of when he got out of the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder if you could share a little about that because some of the feelings and the emotions that you guys went through, I think also really exemplify. They're just it's just one human example. You're here with skin on of so much of what the service member or the veteran who comes back experiences and creates some of the real tensions in the marriage. So could you share a little bit about that? What happened when you got back and you started pastoring?
Yeah.
That just
Well, it's everything. Think about, I guess the easiest way to say this is, you mentioned being a single parent. Think about everything that a single parent would have to deal with. They're dealing with the finances, they're dealing with the discipline of the children, they're doing the shopping. I mean, it's the routines that have been set up in the home. It's all of those things. And they're doing it. And, the most resourceful people on the planet are military spouses. I'm convinced of that. Something breaks, they figure out how to fix it. If something goes wrong with one of the kids and they have, discipline challenges or something happens, they figure out how to deal with that and how to address that. So they're doing all of those things. But what's different is they're not viewed as a single parent.
right.
And so a lot of the times they're not even treated in the same way a single parent would, where people are offering help and people are coming alongside of them because, well, you have a husband or wife and you are doing your thing. So I'm sure it's fine. And so I think for a lot of military spouses, it's a very lonely situation because they're dealing with it as a single parent if they have kids, but without the support that a normal single parent would, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then the service member comes home. And the service member comes home, and at first it's great because it's this kind of honeymoon type of reunion, and that lasts for a few weeks. Maybe it lasts for a month. But eventually conversations about finances and about disciplining the children and about home routines and about all of the stuff that the spouse has been dealing with without you. Now you drop another person into the middle of that, and it's not another person who doesn't belong. It's the parent to those children. It's the husband or wife to that spouse. And so you have to find a way to make it work. And it can become very disruptive. If it's not handled well, it's not only disruptive, but it can create bitterness. I've been doing this without you, and now you want to tell me how to do this, or you want to handle the kids in this way, or you want us to do this with our finances, right? And so so you go through that, and if you deal with it well, you get through it, and then 6 months later, you're going back into that process of preparing for another deployment, handing all of that back to the parent that's left behind, and then doing it over and over again. And I think sometimes it's the stress of just the repeated doing it over and over again that eventually really damages relationships.
Yeah. Well, and then for you too, once you got out, there's also that kind of disconnect, when you were, you were, like you said, you were the tip of the spear across Iraq. And
Mm.
but now you come home and you got to go to the grocery store, and you had
Yeah.
there's kind of that disconnect of, wait, I had purpose. I was doing this really important thing. And now what am I
Yeah.
doing? And so that can
Yeah.
cause some
Well, and so
problems.
then you start to talk about layers, right? So you've got the normal deployment stuff, which is what I just described, and you throw on top of that then the trauma piece, and if someone is getting out of the military, their own personal struggles. So now we're talking about reintegration, and we're talking about all those things that are a struggle. But now you're doing that with someone who's not well, and that was our story. Is I came home from Iraq, and I went to work on a church staff, and it took me a while before I stopped looking at people as unimportant and uninformed, and a
Yeah.
lot of what was happening is just so silly. Like 30 days ago, I was in a combat environment, and now I'm doing just the most mundane stuff, and none of this seems important. So you're trying to do the reintegration part with someone who's just not well, and they're trying to figure out their own identity and their own place in the world, not just in the home, but in the world. And that creates these layers of issues that have to be worked through, and require a lot of help to actually address them and work through them.
Well, and that's where your legacy programs with Mighty Oaks come through. Although
That's
I
right.
don't want to gloss over, on your website, you have several really great blog posts and support pieces for, you have a lot for the military person, but also for the spouses. You had some really nice articles and resources there. I want to make sure we point out. But then there are the legacy programs. There's the one for the men. And again, you're dealing with some really big stuff. It's not just a little communication tweak, right?
Right. Well, and
Yeah.
if you think about this in terms of anyone who's been through marriage counseling, or part of a marriage ministry, or communication around having a good marriage.
Yeah.
I think if it's done right, it begins with the individuals in the marriage, because those individuals need to be well and healthy and clear on their roles
Yeah.
before you can get to the point of saying, all right, now let's get on the same page. You have to start with each person in that relationship doing what they're supposed to do, so that you can bring them together then, and they can have a healthy marriage. A healthy marriage is two healthy people.
Yeah.
And until you get there, it's not going to work. And so really through our legacy programs, that's what we do. And I'll let Susanne talk to how we do this with the women, but for the men, it's taking responsibility for who you are and how God created you, and who you are as a man, your role in the world as a man. So understanding that, nailing down your identity. And then we talk about marriage. And what we do is not talk about how your wife should respond in a marriage or what you should expect from her. We don't do that. Our marriage class and our marriage conversations with men in our program is, here's how you should treat your wife and kids. Here's what you should understand from the Bible as your roles in marriage. And once a guy is clear on that, then we can begin, putting the other pieces in place for a solid marriage.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I'm so glad you made that very clear, so people will really understand if they themselves might be someone struggling that's a service member or
Yeah.
military, or it might be their friend or their relative. You've really helped them, our marriage champions, understand what that man will get from a legacy program at Mighty Oaks. But Susanne, tell us about what the women, you kind of have a twofold audience for women, right?
Right. Yeah, we do. We really have, because we really serve the military service member or first responder, and then the spouse as well. And it's really interesting how that kind of mixes together, because even though maybe not everyone is coming from the same perspective in life. Sometimes it is the military service member is also the spouse, or maybe is married and not quite sure how to function within that marriage. Because, like Jeremy was saying, you know, when a service member comes home and you're the spouse, you've been doing this. I've been doing this by myself this whole time. I'm fine. Like, I'm fine. I can keep doing this all by myself. But is
Yeah.
that how God has designed for marriage to be? No. And so it's really having an understanding of, yes, I can do this on my own. And I mean, I was there for me and Jeremy. I'm like, okay, you just need to figure yourself out. If this is going to work out, like, you figure that out, because I'm fine. I can do this by myself. I've been doing this with the kids. I've been doing this at home, and I can do this. But if we're going to be married, and if we're going to have this kind of a relationship that honors and glorifies God, like, that's not how he's designed for us to function within a marriage relationship. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of what we bring to the ladies, is kind of from that perspective. And it's from both sides, is as the service member, really having an understanding of, maybe you are the service member, but you're also a wife, and you're also the mom. And what does that look like in your home when you're away, but then also when you come home? And then from the spouse's perspective as well. And on our team, we have all of those situations represented. So we have on our women's programs team, we have ladies who are veterans, we have ladies who are first responders, and the spouses of any of those. And so from all of those perspectives, we can speak into any of the situations that are represented by the ladies that come. And so it's just been kind of neat to watch it grow over time to that place. And just like Jeremy said, all of our ladies who are on our programs team are graduates of our program. So they've kind of been through that themselves. And so we're speaking from a place of personal experience and the things that God has done in our lives to be able to now allow us to share with the ladies. And then in our marriage class, we kind of do the same. I feel like the marriage class that we teach at both the men's program and the women's program kind of is the same. And it's really, how do we have this kind of a marriage that follows how God has designed for it to be? And what does he say in his word about the different roles that we have? And it does start with identity and knowing who we are in Christ, because that's really, I would say, the theme in our entire program. Like, it doesn't really matter what the other person is doing, that God has called you to be a certain way. And regardless of whether your husband is doing that or not, regardless of whether this other person is doing what he's supposed to be doing or not, it's really you doing what God has called you to do and being the person that God has called you to be. And in our marriage class, that theme kind of continues. And so we talk a lot about personal responsibility, and really in a marriage relationship, your role as the wife, that actually means something. And God has called or asked us to live in a certain way in that role. And even if you can do it all by yourself, it's, great, but that's not how God's designed for it to be. And so really bringing that into the marriage class has been very impactful, and really for both, for all the ladies that are represented, at a program, it has been very impactful.
Yeah.
Right.
And then once I love how too, you talk about the personal responsibility and then kind of getting them to whatever the next step is, whether it be a substance abuse program or individual counseling or marriage counseling. And then when they're really kind of on that page, you have a dedicated team member that will connect them to the Family Lives Weekend to Remember. And tell us why you decided to partner with them.
Well, out of need, I guess. It was recognizing that we can do this, but there are people who do it better. Early on, we started hosting our own marriage retreats, and they were helpful, I think, and people enjoyed them. We have close to 1,000 folks a year come through our programs right now. We've had more than 7,000 people who have attended.
Yeah.
And so when you start looking at the math there, that's a lot of folks. It's a lot of marriages. That represents a lot of families. And we just realized that we, A, couldn't keep up with the need. We couldn't do enough programs to help all of the folks that needed help. And then B, there are people who do it better than us. People who this is their whole life, right, is focused on helping husband and wife get on the same page and understand what a biblical blueprint for marriage looks like. And so we reached out to Family Life. And for those in your audience that aren't familiar, most may be, I guess, but they host what they call the Weekends to Remember. It's a Friday, Saturday, and a Sunday morning, I think. And they're held all over the country. They're fantastic. Susanne and I went earlier this year, and really very focused. It's a lot of people, but they're very focused, and it's so helpful. And so we reached out to them and said, we'd love to partner with you on this. We have a lot of folks that we know need a program like this. would you help us? And they did. And so we scholarship at a much discounted rate the graduates from our program to the family life weekends to remember. And man, those have been very powerful for those couples. And so you think about everything we've talked about. You've got a husband who is trying to figure things out. He gets a hold of his identity. He understands who he is in Christ. He is acquainted with, engaged with his role in marriage. So you've got that on one hand, and then you have a wife who attends a women's program and goes through that same process. And now we're able to put them into the same space for a couple of days and have some very gifted communicators help them understand their roles in marriage. And it's been very, very powerful.
Yeah.
Well, and I love that you make it easy, because you've got somebody on staff at Mighty Oaks that helps get them to the place that's going to be,
Yep.
It's not going to be sold out. It's not going to be full. They're going to have their spot. They're going to have a way to pay for it. They're going to have, and just handles all the details and logistics. So it just removes a barrier for our military families. Susanna, you had a heart to encourage the families further, and you created your devotional. And I love what you call them 4 B's. That's another thing that was on your website that help participants maintain their transformation, be in the Word of God daily, be in prayer daily, be in fellowship, and be in contact, but be in prayer and in the Word of God. So you created that Shield of Faith, 365 daily devotions for military families. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, that was, it came out in 2022. And so that project kind of started rolling about 2020 or so. Conversations around it started being had. And so ended up just choosing 12 kind of themes. So each month has its own theme. And they really are some things that I felt like as I was kind of putting this together, military families might struggle with, but I feel like families in general might struggle with throughout the year, and just topics that could be an encouragement, and even, scripture surrounding it. And so it's really great. We actually do give the devotional out to every graduate of our women's program, our Women's Legacy program with Mighty Oaks. And it's actually funny that you mentioned the 4 B's or interesting that you mentioned it, because that is one of the things that we talk about, at the end of our program. And so we're able to hand them this devotional as well, just to kind of help them kind of get into that routine of being in the Word on a daily basis, being in prayer on a daily basis. And the heart behind it really was just to encourage military families. It's called Shield of Faith. And, in Ephesians chapter 6, it talks about the armor of God. And that's really kind of the thought behind that is having that protection of being daily in the Word, and really using that against the attacks that the enemy might bring our way. Because when a Christian family is choosing to live for the Lord, and they are choosing to follow the principles that He's put in place for us in His Word to live our lives by, then we all know that the enemy would want nothing more but to not allow that family to continue to move forward for Him. And so the attacks will come. And so the idea behind it is, it is specifically to military families, because, our heart is for military families, but I have gifted it to a lot of non-military families. And, they have said it has been an encouragement to them for the same, just to always be mindful that the enemy is attacking, and he will attack us when we're trying to move forward for the Lord. And so the idea behind it is just to give something to be an encouragement to kind of, I guess, move against the enemy's attacks in that way.
Yeah. And to help. And I think that's just wonderful. And I know it's been very well received and had great reviews. Now, Jeremy, in the last few minutes, I do want to mention you ran 22 marathons in 22 days.
Yes.
Why did you do that? Full marathons, not halves. Why did you do
Yeah, full marathons. So I've been a runner for a long time, most of my life. And as we were approaching Veterans Day a couple of years ago, I say approaching, this was probably in July, Veterans Day is in November. I started thinking about things that I could do to highlight some of the issues related to the veteran community. One of those is veteran suicide, and the number 22 has become kind of synonymous with veteran suicide. We're told that more than 22 veterans every single day take their lives. And so organizationally, as we come to Veterans Day, we always try to highlight some of these issues. And I thought, what could I do to highlight these issues? And one of the thoughts that came to mind is a crazy thought, right? I tried to get people to talk me out of it, and no one would.
I love it.
I thought, what if I ran a marathon a day, so 26.2 miles a day for 22 days? And the running is a thing, but really it was just to serve as a conversation starter. Why
Yes.
22? Well, because of the veterans, 22 veterans a day that take their lives, and what can we do about it? And really to begin that conversation. And so I did, and ended on Veterans Day. We had where our headquarters is in Conroe, Texas. We had a community marathon, and a lot of people came out for that, and that was the last one. But yeah, it was quite an experience.
Wow. That I'm a runner, but not like that. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And there's a documentary. Is it on YouTube? I think if anyone
There
wanted
is. It's on the streaming services, on Prime and some of the other streaming services, and it's just called 22. Yeah.
22. And which one was it again? It was Prime. It's on the streaming services.
Prime and the other streaming services, there are a number of them, but the main one is Amazon. Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, Jeremy and Susanna, thank you so much for being here with us. It's just been a pleasure talking with you. And thank you for what you're doing for all of our veteran and service member communities.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marriage Champions, if you'd like any more information about Mighty Oaks Foundation and the work they're doing, you can always find us at marriageinitiative.org or marriageresources.org.